Hi, everybody. Marissa Douglas, Atlantic Center for Independent Living Social Support Specialist here. I adjust my camera a little bit. And today we're going to start a new series that I have been wanting to do, and I've decided to start it now about disability history. And essentially, I want it to be a series that covers significant people with disabilities that have had, an impact on the United States, other countries, the world overall, or major events in disability history, major movements in disability history. Today we're going to have a very, very special video for Ed Roberts' birthday. So we're going to talk about Ed Roberts and his life story and the story of independent living. Because you might not know, but Ed Roberts is considered the father of independent living, and I will put a picture of Mr. Roberts somewhere, probably over here. Like I said, Ed Roberts is considered the father of independent living. He was born on January 23rd, 1939, and so I'm doing this video this weekend because Saturday is January 23rd. Hopefully you're watching this on the 23rd or maybe 24th. And he grew up in California, and he contracted polio when he was 14. And in case you're possibly unfamiliar with polio, because it's not a thing we really deal with anymore, especially in America. But essentially, it's a virus, and it causes muscle weakness, and also paralysis a lot of times. A lot of disability rights activists, especially that were really heavily involved, like the 60s and 70s, 80s, up until the passage of the ADA, actually did have polio themselves. But so Ed contracted it at the age of 14, and he was paralyzed from the neck down. And he, at night, used a device called an iron lung, which is essentially a device that you lay in, and it helps you breathe if you are unable to, yourself. His mother, so after he got sick and contracted polio and became paralyzed, his mother, really did this kind of set, an example for Ed, as far as like fighting for his own needs, because he was homeschooled, because this is back in the mid 50s. Nothing was really accessible to wheelchair users or people who needed an iron lung like Ed did. But his mother, Zona Roberts, did want him to go to school at least a few hours a week instead of being strictly homeschooled and kind of very isolated. And this really showed Ed how to fight for himself, and eventually he would use that to not only fight for himself but to fight for other people with disabilities. And after high school, this is where his work with disability activism really started to go to new levels. He wanted to attend college, like most people do, after high school, and he wanted to go to the University of California at Berkeley. However, it was a fight to get him in there. I had to really fight for supports because California's Department of Vocational Rehab, DVR, which I'm sure a lot of us are familiar with if you're familiar with the disability world at all, said he was essentially too disabled to ever work, and they didn't really feel it was necessary to support him going to college. And on a similar note, many of the administrators at Berkeley, at Berkeley, said that the university had students with significant disabilities before, and it didn't work out, and tried to block Ed Roberts from being admitted. However, there were enough administrators that supported Ed in seeking admission, and he was admitted in 1962. Like I said, he was really one of the first people with a significant disability to attend Berkeley, and that came with a lot of new territory for the university, and for Ed himself living on his own for the first time. And there was debate about where he would live. Eventually, Roberts and the university came to an agreement that he would live in essentially the medical building, the health facility on campus. However, he wanted it, if he was going to live there, to be treated just the same as any other student's dorm, and not like he's living in a hospital or like a nursing home or like that type of setting, or like a rehab facility, but like a dorm. And over the years that Ed attended Berkeley, many more students with disabilities joined him, and this led to Berkeley making this residence like an official residence program. It was called the Cal Residence Program, and the students who lived in the Cal residence bonded and became friends, and began calling themselves the Rolling Quads, which was quite something for a lot of people on campus to see, because the Rolling Quads kind of had a positive identity of disability and disability pride, and like just a real sense of not viewing their disability as negative, which back in the 50s, or no, this was the 60s, sorry, back in the 60s, was mind-blowing to people. I mean, still today, when people say, oh, I don't hate being disabled, it's not inherently a negative thing, many people are still like, well, what do you mean by that? So back in the 60s, this was very, shocking to many people that people would have a positive sense of disability identity. Eventually, though, the Rolling Quads became like a formal student organization at Berkeley, and they became the Physically Disabled Students Program. And they became essentially an advocacy group. And one of their main missions, because again, this is the 1960s, especially in the early 60s, when before many disability access laws were passed, way before the ADA, way before even Section 504, so one of their main projects was getting curb cuts installed in streets around the greater Berkeley area, not just on campus, but also, just in the town, the city of Berkeley itself. So it would give them greater access to the city they lived in, which was very successful. And later on, Roberts was able to secure federal funding for the Physically Disabled Students Program. And they expanded even more from not just doing advocacy, but also beginning to provide services like referrals to attendance services, and also wheelchair repairs to students. There, as the Physically Disabled Students Program, grew, they became known, off campus, and began receiving calls not just from students anymore, but also from residents of the city of Berkeley and other surrounding areas, that would call them and be like, can you help me find a personal care assistant, or a wheelchair is broken and I need repairs, or I need something else. And, you know, through seeing this need, the people involved in the PDSP, uh, um, you know, saw a need to fulfill, and this is when we see the first Center for Independent Living. Now, the Berkeley Center for Independent Living, which is still around and going strong, and essentially was really a model, like a shift in like ways of doing things and ways of thinking about like disability services, because before, and even, you know, to this day, a lot of times, disability services are provided by people without disabilities, and they're, you know, overseen by people without disabilities. But CILS, you know, we have to have our staff be at least half people with disabilities. So we're run for and by people with disabilities. You know, and that's, you know, a completely new way of thinking, that it's kind of consumer led, which, you know, had never really been done before. One misconception about the first Center for Independent Living is that Ed Roberts was immediately the executive director, helped found it. Actually, that's not true. The people he worked with in the physically disabled students program back at Berkeley, they founded it, and they were, you know, obviously very influenced by Ed Roberts. So that's why he's kind of called the father of independent living, because he really got like people together. You know, he started the Cal Residence program at Berkeley, you know, by fighting for his rights, which got people to come together. So that influence, and him being the first one to start like this chain of events, is kind of why he's called the father of independent living. However, he wasn't initially the executive director. He was eventually the executive director, and he, you know, came in and expanded the CIL greatly, and again really solidified the model for the rest of CILs that are now throughout every county in America, including Atlantic Center. You know, for how CILs need to be run, how to be a consumer-led agency. Yeah, but he wasn't initially the executive director. It's which is a big misconception that a lot of people have. Other notable accomplishments of Mr. Ed Roberts include that he was the director of the DVR of California, you know, in 1976 and 1983. And he, you know, that was the same organization that at one point told him he was too disabled to work. There was no point in him going to college because he would, you know, never really do anything. Eventually he ran it, so, you know, I love that part of his story. He eventually also founded the World Institute on Disability with Judy Heumann, who we will also talk about at some point, which is still around today and is still internationally renowned for disability activism work and disability politics work. And he was also heavily involved in the movement to get both the Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act passed and also the ADA passed. Roberts eventually did pass away in 1995 in March at the age of 56. So that was the story of Mr. Ed Roberts, the father of independent living. I hope you learned something. If you didn't know the story of Ed Roberts and how CILs like Atlantic came to be, I hope you learned. Hope you enjoyed. If you do have any more disability related history events, like people with disabilities that, you think I should cover, or specific events that should be covered, or like historical movements that should be covered related to disability, and drop them or type them in the comments below, and I will see what you have to offer. Maybe some things I've never even heard about. That'd be kind of fun. All right. Thank you so much for watching, and bye bye.